I've been doing these lectures now for a long time. When I was going to, one of the reasons, when I was going to school, I went to school at California Institute of the Arts between 71 and 74. And in fact, there's some drawings, many drawings, that are on that wall, which were done in that time period. But one of the lectures which I really loved at Cal Arts when I was there was a lecture that Richard Serra did. And he had lost his slides. He didn't have any slides. He didn't have any. So he basically gave a lecture with a blackboard. And it was so wonderful to see him do that, that I wanted to do the same thing. And so over the years, I've given lectures without any media whatsoever. I've done them with a blackboard or a whiteboard, and done them with slides. Now, since I started, in the last 15 years, the lectures have in a way, been streamlined, you could say. The first third is me and the whiteboard or blackboard, and that is when you see me trying to remember how this all got started, how the signs entered my work, what were how did it all begin, and then that really covers from 1973 to about 1980, 1982. And then at that point, I could keep going, talking that way, and I have, but I have slides that come in. So at the beginning, I'm in a way kind of struggling. You'll see that I talk with my eyes closed. I have twins, a boy and girl. They're now 15, and they've seen me give lectures, and they're horrified because I talk with my eyes closed a lot. And it is me attempting to make order out of disorder. To do that demands a concentration, and I will close my eyes, and that seems to help in making that order more understandable. Ideas don't come up in rows, and yet when I give a lecture, I have 2 hours, and it's 1 minute after another, and it's in a row, and I have to explain how these ideas connect. So thus, I have to change that story so you can understand how things work in my work, for me. So the second part is with slides. And the thing about slides is that they help my memory. If I've forgotten something, I'll see it in the slide and I'll say, oh yeah, I remember that, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And so I'm now following the slides. The media has come in. I'm no longer having to pull it out of my head. It's there for me. So it becomes like a kind of false memory or a memory helper. And then the third will be 2 DVDs. One for sure, which is a performance I did at the Whitney Museum a year and a half ago as part of the Whitney Biannual. And the other is something that was called the Computer Project, which is not really a computer project. It's called 5 into 1, which is a project I did with the French Ministry of Culture. And it's one of the very first virtual environments, what you would now call Second Life. This was in 1990. That was a while ago when it comes to virtual reality. It was just starting out, and this is one of the very first instances of it. And I'm interested in the relationship between virtual reality and the state of trance. And so that's all kind of like how it is. Okay. So I'm going to put my glasses and my book down because they hit the mic, and that's trouble. Both my parents are artists. My father died some 12 years ago now, and something like that. I grew up in Santa Monica, California. I traveled a lot as a child. Our house was filled with what you would call anthropological objects, artwork from New Guinea, from China, from they're contemporary artists, so they collected a lot of Kachina dolls and Hopi objects and Navajo and whatever. So I grew up in this place and traveled, as I said, I lived in Rome a little bit as a child, and I lived in South America and so forth and so on, just traveled a lot. And I also, then after high school, I went to California Institute of the Arts, where I met my friends, who I still know, and I studied with John Baldessari. He was my teacher. He has a show now, or it did, at Tate Modern, and it's always fun. There's a piece in the Baldessari show which is Secret Handshakes, and I was looking at it and I recognized my ring because I'm one of the hands, and that all of his he used his students as props, and I really enjoyed that. That was wonderful, being a prop for John. Okay, and then I studied there until 1973, 74. I moved to New York and have lived there pretty much constantly since that period, and now I live in Berlin. My wife is a curator, and we live in Berlin with our kids for the last 15 months. And so I'm in Berlin for a little while now. Okay, can we put light on this board a little bit so people can see it? When I was second year of CalArts, I wanted to deal with light. What I did is I would get lights not unlike these, and I would put gels in front of them. And I was interested in the different, how the colored light changed things around me. And for instance, I would get color aid cards, which are these color cards that you buy in an art supply store, so you can always match the hue and so forth of a color as a painter's helper. And it was a box of color, and I put them all, I would pin them up on a wall and then put a green light on it. So it changed everything. Or I'd put them up and I put a green plastic sheeting on top of it, and that changed it as well. I did a performance where what I did is that I turned out the light in a performance area like now, and then I covered the stage in these bits of color in the dark. And then I picked them back up again and put them back in the box and then turned on the lights again. And you could see all the colors that I'd missed because I was blind to them. But I was interested in the fact that when I think of a color, such as, this DVD, the writing on this DVD, which says Geneva, if I move it over here, it changes pretty dramatically. And what happens is that from millisecond to millisecond, as I move that color around, it's changing. The color changes. But yet the color is the same. The color has not changed, but the light has changed, thus the color has changed. So what's constant is not the color itself that we see, but the relationship between the color and the light, the algorithm between these two factors. That stays the same. But in my head, it's very different. I see something very different when I move it around. And so I would say, do a film, a Super 8 movie, where I was shooting, there would be a color aid card, and at the beginning you see my hand holding a card, and then I'd zoom in so the color was the entire screen, and then the film would have turned into a gel that was just lighting the wall, a color itself. So the color becomes the subject of a card in the picture to becoming the film itself, just being a colored film. And that was a kind of an object I would do. A sheet of green plexiglass with two lights lighting each wall. So I said, all I see are light patterns. And that's what I was illustrating. I was illustrating what my eye sees. But, so if I'm looking at you all, and then I look down at those two bottles, they're the same. You're the same. when I say all I see are light patterns, it puts tremendous distance between me and you, and between me and everything I'm looking at, because everything becomes an illusion. And there's no difference. So there's no difference between life and death. There's no difference between big and small. There's no difference between soft and hard. There's no difference between anything, any texture, because it's all been equalized in that psyche to say that everything is just pattern. That's all it is. So that's all my work at that time. Then, I had an idea for a piece. It was April 1973. And in fact, there's a drawing on the wall, which is probably the first drawing of this idea beyond this one. This was an idea for a drawing, which I never did, except I do it on boards all the time, which is a car's tire. And it's a detail of a car that never existed, never would exist. It's a fictional tire of a fictional car. And what I would be interested in is, okay, so who's driving the car? Where is the car? What time of day is the car moving? Are there any passengers in the car? Did it rain the day before, or is it raining now? Are we in the desert? Are we by the beach? All these practical questions about what's happening in the picture itself is what I was involved with. So rather than be involved with the surface, I wanted to go into the picture and start going in and then out, beyond, on the other side. So in a sense, this is a detail of a fictional reality. Now, it points to what's outside it, but that, whatever that is, doesn't exist. Not in the way that I know what things are existing. So when I had this idea, all my work had been about light patterns and this kind of removal. And this seemed to be about something else, but it was really just the other side of the coin. At the same time, within weeks of this, I thought of another work. John's class at Cal Arts was called Post-Studio Art. And I had an idea to actually have a studio where I have a calendar, a clock, and a plant, and then a stick figure. And I called him Glenn. I called the stick figure Glenn. And Glenn did all kinds of things inside the studio space. I never had a studio in school. I never had a place to work in school. I only worked in my notebook, and I worked in where I slept. But I never had a place to work there. But I had this studio, this imaginary studio. So one of the first things that Glenn does is he takes a pin and he pricks his finger. And I was interested in the pain that he felt when he pricked his finger. Where was that pain? I could feel it. He gets a pin, he puts it in his finger, and I could feel the pain there. He did other things. He screamed, he ran around, he put his hands on his head, he covered his eyes, his ears, he put his hands in his mouth, he drew on the walls, he made constructions here and there. At the end, there are maybe 500 drawings that I made of Glenn and doing different things. I went through an anatomy book and a psychology book, biology and psychology, where I could really go into his motives and into his memories, his psyche, and then also into his blood and in his bones and in his hair. There's all this point of building up this person, trying to identify who he is. Well, in doing this, not long after that, I moved to New York. I was on an exchange program with Cooper Union. I took advantage of this at Cal Arts. So I moved to New York, and I lived uptown on 75th Street in an empty apartment that some friends of my parents had. And then this story continues. So one of the things I draw then is I drew a dead stick figure to go in the room with the living stick figure. And because I was interested in the difference between the two, that one is living and one is dead inside the picture. And death I just did a show of a lot of drawings similar to out there, and it's with the Drawing Center in New York. And I started to count the number of times the word death exists in my drawings. And the amount of time that life exists, the word life exists and the word world exists. And then also the numbers of times heaven exists. So there are these concepts that keep coming back and back and back. But really one of the most ones I've used is death and dead. It's interesting because I was interested, when I'm talking about Glenn inside, I'm not talking about the surface, I'm not talking about this structure, but I'm talking about that space, that psychology. I wanted to go in there. I wanted to prove that stick figures lived lives. I wanted to prove that this place was real. I wanted to prove, as when I was a child, that Bugs Bunny was young at one point, and that Donald Duck and Betty Boop, you know, all those cartoon characters that lived in that place. Well, having drawn a dead stick figure, I wanted to draw a real dead stick figure. I wanted to have that confrontation with a dead person, a physical dead person. So I called up the city morgue in New York City, and they hung up on me before I could even get halfway through. I'd like to come down and take a photograph, and they hung up. They didn't even go beyond close to that. So then I went to the New York Public Library Picture Library, which was a fantastic, pre-Google, this was the place where you could get, they had hundreds of thousands of pictures. So I went to the woman behind the desk and I asked if they had photographs of dead people. And she said they had, what kind do you want? They had Civil War dead, Spanish-American War dead, gangster dead, World War I dead, World War II dead, disaster dead. They had murder dead. They had all of these different kinds of dead. And I took them, and what I did is that over the photograph, I drew a stick figure. But really what I had to do was find a dead man. A friend of mine was going to Yale University and had a cadaver. The cadaver's face was wrapped in formaldehyde and gauze for the first half. So they had gone through the heart, they had gone through the lungs, they had gone through the legs, they had gone through the toes. But the face was never visible because it was hidden, because they are saying it's a body. It's not a human, it's not a living, it's not a person, and not a personality. This doesn't have a name, it is a body. They say that the body had been in formaldehyde for 6 months. Thus, every cell in the cadaver's body had been transformed. And in doing that, it's a model. It's not a real person. This is a model of a person because everything's different now. So he says, we've unwrapped the face. He calls me up. And because he knew I wanted to come take pictures of the head, because that's the part that's interesting. And so he called me up and says, look, tomorrow we're going to start cutting the face, so you better come up here tonight. And I got on the next train. And I got there, and there they were, all the cadavers. There was a whole class, it must have been 20 in this big room. And it wasn't gruesome and it wasn't haunted. It was kind of just very biological. It was very clean and not so threatening. And his cadaver was on his stomach. And one of the things I really wanted to do was to pinch I was interested in the face, and the face was facing down, so we had to turn him over. And when we turned the cadaver over, truly, the left arm fell off. It fell on the floor. And so I had to pick up the arm and put it back. Because they had gone through the joint and it was like just there. It was just on the table. They'd already gone through that part. And there his face. They had already cut the outside and you could see the skull. And what I did to the cadaver is what Glenn was doing to himself. I covered his eyes. I shouted in his ear. I put my hand in his mouth. I blew the hair on the back of the head. I pinched his arm. And I did let go. Some part of me didn't want to hurt him. So I pinched the cadaver's arm, and at that point, that is really, it's like the pinching of the arm of Glenn, what he was doing to himself. And that was just the fact of going into that body. It was something I wanted to do, coming from the pictured body, you could say, in front of me. The next day we talked about the experience, and he took photographs as I was doing this. And we talked about him and it. He looked sad, he looked poor, he looked like he was a drunk, like a street person, that he maybe sold his body for booze. It smelled, it was rough, it was crackly, it was slimy, it was sticky. It had all these other adjectives attached to it. So it was both. It was him and it together. And when you talk about subject-object split, like when you see a sculpture and you can say, yes, it's 200 pounds of marble and it's my daughter. You know, they coexist. The subject on one side and the object on the other. In the cadaver, that is the primary, that's the heavy point of subject-object split. That's when it really matters. And I got into trouble with friends who thought it was sacrilegious that I would do this, that I would actually slap the cheek of a cadaver's face, or put my hands in the mouth of a cadaver. They thought this was gross and awful. And yet there are other artists doing similar things with the cadavers. So that was like something that was in the fall of 73. Another thing that was happening was that when I was going into pictures, I decided to get into comic books. And what I was doing is that I was interested in the details of comics. So I was interested, not Superman himself, but the air Superman was flying through, or the smell of the flowers where Spider-Man is swinging around, or the idea that there's details inside this picture that you go into when you're reading it and you're involved in the characters, that you can go into that world and you can start taking things out of it. And so I did a series, Details from an Imaginary Universe, where I was cutting out all of these physical bits of information that lead you to believe it's a real place. And there's a couple that are out there, these little comic books that are cut up. So I was doing that. Also at this time, my dream life was very, very active. I was living by myself, and not only was I cutting up comics, but I was interested in, when I woke up, to remember where my dreams were and what was happening. So I remember a dream very much after waking up of walking down a street and looking at the ground I was walking on in a dream and noticing the way the grass was growing up between the cobblestones and the sidewalk. These big stones with this little grass coming through, and paying attention to the grass and saying, that's what I was interested in. That's what I want to remember about the dream. Nothing more substantial, nothing more, it's not, you know, something scary or funny. It's just a fact that's part of the dream, a little pack. And like and then thinking about it later on, when you walk up to a house in a dream that you've never been to, and you open up the door, and as you open up the door and you put your head in, I immediately, as I'm opening up the door, I can see the front hallway, the stairs on the right side, the foyer here, the kitchen in the far back with the TV room with a bunch of chairs, and it's all from like the 1920s. And it has the, you know, the green, this kind of sickly green wallpaper, and there's a cat, and there's a, you know, I could describe a lot of it. But as that door opens, I am the architect and the interior decorator of that house. So you create something and you find your creation as you dream it. It's a kind of a perfect form of creativity that we all experience when we're just free associating in our dreams. But this is the kind of thing that I was interested in. I was interested in what I do not see in the comics, what was happening before the story started, what happens after the story ends, what happens upstairs in that house in my dream. I had an argument with my father in a dream. We were in a small shack, a small room with low ceilings, and it's a wooden floor, and he's standing in front of me. He's very tall, and I say to him, This is a dream. This is real. And you can feel it when you stamp on the floor. I can feel the wood vibrate. And he looks at me and he says, no, but this is a dream. This is a fiction. This is a projection. You're dreaming. This is nothing. This is not even a real place. I said, but look, I can feel the vibration on the floor. He says, that doesn't mean anything. And then I said, but I can feel it. And I said, it's real. It's real. It's real. And I was saying this, having an argument with my father about this. Who was a painter. He was a painter, an abstract, kind of an abstract painter, a surrealist type. And very smart and very open and very supportive of my work as a conceptual artist. So this is what, but this was like a dream that I remembered being fairly important. At the same time, what I'm doing also is I'm taking photographs of where I'm living. So I'm taking photographs of my kitchen, my bathroom, my bedroom, the refrigerator door, what's inside the refrigerator, out my window, down on the street, in a car. I'm kind of documenting my life just because this is a weird place. And I wanted to document just in a sense, inside the real world, making pictures. So that's what I was doing as well as doing it that way. Now, another drawing that was done and we're still in 73 here, was in an imaginary studio that I had 4 objects. One was a fictional object that never existed, which is a kind of this strange sculpture that looks like an H with a kind of a curly end here. And that's one object. Another object was a magnifying glass that happened to be in front of me on the desk where I was doing the drawing. And then I drew a telephone, a receiver, a giant telephone. That was from a dream, which was from my worst nightmare as a child. I was in the mountains being chased by a dragon, and I had this giant telephone, and I was dragging it, and the dragon was coming up to eat me, and I couldn't walk away from it because I had this huge phone. And then the last one was a bit of Fate's control panel. Now, that was from a deity, you could say. Now, when I was very young, when I was, say, 10 years old or younger, my mother was Catholic when she was brought up, but I grew up in Los Angeles mostly, and what she did was that I had no real kind of religious upbringing. But I did believe that as I lived my life, that fate was looking at me. And there was a kind of like, almost like a one-armed bandit, like a slot machine. And there's a TV, and I'm on the TV. And then fate is looking at me on TV and controlling my life. And there are many, many drawings I did of this over the years. And the birth date, September 18th, 1951. And then there are different death days. I think 2023, 2025, 2015. But we're getting close now. I was doing this in 1970s. But now I'm getting close. And on those numbers, I'm starting to look at those death days on all my early drawings as I'm getting older. But I was interested in the fact that as a child, I had this idea of fate controlling my life. So if I stubbed my toe, or if something happened that was an accident or that was a problem, I say that's fate. That answers that question. Another thing I believed when I was a child, I used to look at photographs of my parents before I was born, and I'd say, where am I? I should be there. And they said, no, but you weren't born yet. And I said, so where was I? I didn't know where I was. So then I had this idea that before I was born, I was on a conveyor belt, and with other babies before they were born. And I drew it. I drew this conveyor belt. And then you'd have a chute that said Mullican on it. And that chute would go into my life. And so, but there are other shoots that had Mueller and, you know, alphabetical or whatever. But they you know, whatever. But I chose to go down this way. And this is very cartoony. Both of these are visions of heaven, you might say, but they're really Warner Brothers heaven. This is like, how many robots have you seen being made in a Warner Brothers cartoon with that music? Dun 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 dun. And it's very much like that. And this fate is very much like that. So then I have my life here. So fate controls me and answers the question, why do things happen in my life, and where was I before I was born? Well, I was here. I don't know what happened before I was on the conveyor belt, but I know before I was born, I was on the conveyor belt. And then at my death, fate meets death. And now death was a new person for me. And I really, because of the cadaver, I thought of the personality of death as another way of dealing with the concept of death. So you have the personality of death, and you have the personality of fate, and they meet in a semicircular corridor, and they decide if I go up to heaven or down to hell. Now this is and hell, and if you notice, it is a Y shape. It's like you go, and then also I still don't quite understand why it's a half of a circle room, a semicircular room, and that's a cosmology. It answers, where was I before I was born? Why do things happen the way they do when I live my life? And what happens after I die? And so it contextualizes. And I've done hundreds of these drawings over the years. It's just an endless thing. You do it again and again. And I did the first one in the fall of '73. And I grew up in a house filled with these what you'd call these kind of anthropological artworks, where you would have, as I said, Chinese art, Japanese art, Egyptian art, pre-Columbian art, New Guinea, Oceanic. And almost everything in our house had a relationship to either a cosmology, and it had to do with somehow controlling fate or giving yourself a good season ahead, or it was medicinal, medicine bundles, where you would that somehow the picture would help you to have a better life. And so, but they were all most of them were cosmologies, and I started to do this drawing again and again because one of the things that art seemed to have was that it visualized the cosmology, and that seemed to be something that a lot of art from around the world did. So why not do it? Now, I don't believe that this is true. If I don't believe that, I mean, as a child I believed it, but now I think I don't believe that I was on a conveyor belt before I was born. But, so it's a model. It's a model of a possible cosmology that surrounds me. It's a bit of a ridiculous model, but it's still a model. And so it's more of a cosmogony than a cosmology. A cosmogony is a dead cosmology, or a cosmology that's not real. Because a cosmology, in the end, is an agreement amongst living people. A community can come up with any cosmology, and if they believe in it truly, then it is real. It becomes alive. But there's no one believing in this one. So you need more than one person to talk about it. And so that's not real. So I was starting to do all these drawings. I was taking photographs of where I was living. And I started to come up with all these different, you could say, signs. So this is still 73 at this point. One of the other things I did is that I was into these fictional details, these details from comic strips and all. So what I did is, and I also had Glenn doing all that, I came up with a series of details of an imaginary life, a woman. I made it a woman so it separate me from her. And that's a piece that I did in like November '73. And it really starts out with this woman's birth, and it goes until she gets, you know, she goes to college, she gets married, she has kids, her husband dies, and eventually she dies. And they retire, and they have all these statements, these details, like the salt on the dining room table, the static on the phone, the person living down the street, the clouds 200 feet away or whatever. But it's about details of the place she lived in. So I have now, up to now, I have a stick figure, and he's in a studio space. You could say he's framed. You can put something in there with him. And then I have a photograph. No, I have a comic book that is, say this is a comic from a comic strip, comic. And then I have a photograph, which I was been taking of, or taking out of newspapers or whatever. So it's a photograph of a person here. And then over here, I'd have a drawing of a stick figure just directly on a sheet of paper or on the wall or something without a frame. This is without a frame. And then I would have, and this really happened the next year in '74, where I came up with, or '75, where I came up with a symbol of a person, like in the bathroom. And there's one up there of a running person, which means exit, in green. And so that would be the symbol. And then later on, I came up with an idea for a head and a body, where I wanted to have the most reduced vision of what a person could be, and that's a head and a body. And then I came up with this idea of where you have a person made up of a head, 2 arms, a body, and 2 legs. And then you'd have the head, the body, 2 legs, and 2 arms. And they would be different colors. So this is beginning of the breakup. And then here you would have a circle, square, triangle. Okay, and then here, and so I'll call them all Glenn. So that's Glenn, and it's a photograph. So you can say, well, and it might be a photograph of Glenn Ford, you know, a movie star. You can say, yeah, I didn't know that's Glenn Ford. And then you have a comic book, and it's Scott Glenn or whatever, but it's Glenn. And then a stick figure Glenn. And then a stick figure unframed Glenn. And then what happens when you start calling the man that is without the person, the anonymous person, you call him an individual, then things are starting to get a little bit strange, because he represents all men and no singular man. He is abstracted to the point of where he is totally anonymous. There is no individuality in him, and yet I'm as interested in how he was represented as an individual. And then you go to the head and body and call him Glenn, or the man broken up and call him Glenn, and then the circle, square, triangle, and then you are totally out of it. You are no longer registering in our reality when you're having your good friend Glenn over at the house. And I remember I was waiting for a bus on Lexington Avenue going downtown, and there was a woman, and I could tell just by the way she was standing that she was not alone. She was standing there, and there was someone in front of her that she was following. The way you follow someone, there's someone that you have your head down a little bit, and obviously there's a presence in front of you that you're following. So I followed her to see what she would do. And I followed her, and I sat behind her on the bus. And within 3 blocks, she starts talking to this person. And who I don't know. But that person is somewhere in this area existing. Now, if I was to take a pin, pretend this is a pin, a la voodoo, and I prick him, Glenn the photograph, and I prick him, Glenn the comic, and I click him, Glenn the stick figure, and I click him, Glenn the stick figure frame, and then the symbol, I click, and then I go to head and body, oh boy, I do him, and then I do the man broken up, the head, I prick the head, and then I go to the triangle. And then I could ask, who feels the most pain? Where does that happen? Does it happen in the photograph, or it happens in the head and body? But what was going on is that there are different kinds of transference here. And I would actually, in my early lectures, lay out the photographs and the pictures on the floor and do it for real and ask the audience. And generally, everybody said the most pain was around here. You're not so remote as to live in this other world, and you're not so abstract as to be a piece of paper. You're kind of in the middle. There's enough room to project on there. And now, also, when you have a photograph of someone, back then, it was considered evidence. Like if I had a photograph of someone killing someone else, it was considered evidence. Now you can dress photos up so much, but back then, that was not so. That was 40 years ago. Or no, 38 years ago that I did that. And so that was a different time. But you see, all of these, everything here is this is paper, this is paper, this is paper, this is paper, this is a wall, this could be wood and stone, this could be paper, this could be paper, this. So it's all the same. And yet this is considered evidence, and this is considered crazy. And this is kind of like this dialogue that I was interested in. This breaking up, you could say, between the subject and the object, and how the two are separating. And so when that woman is having the conversation, she's coming up here somewhere. She's no longer involved with what would consider to be reality. She's someplace else. Now, what I was doing to demonstrate, and wanting to prove that stick figures live lives, and I wanted to enter the picture. That's what I wanted to do. An early performance, I was asked a question today about when did the hypnosis start? And the hypnosis, the first time I was not aware, wasn't even aware of it, but this idea of projection, this idea of going into a picture and like with the car's tire. I had an exhibition in the fall of '73, and I sat in a chair, and then there was a person sat opposite me, and he had a picture that he was holding. And the picture that he was holding was a Piranesi print out of a textbook. And you could see the arch. It was a Roman arch. And I projected my mind's eye into that picture. And projecting my mind's eye into the picture of the Piranesi, I was 14 years old. My father was directing this excavation of this arch, and I was going to be visiting him. And it had rained the night before. It was 11 o'clock in the morning, and I was running towards the arch to meet with my father. And I ran around the arch, and then I went up the hill, which you don't see in the picture, and I looked down on the arch from above. And I described these big puddles that were on top of the arch. And then at that point, the person that had the print took a match to it, and the whole thing went up in flames. And I could feel the heat on my face. And then, and it's like the Twilight Zone. Am I stuck forever? You know, that's the kind of thing. Am I going to be stuck in this picture now that I've taken the doorway out? But of course, no, I didn't. What I did is that I shimmied down the hill like skiing because of the mud. It was kind of a muddy hill, and it was loose gravel, dirt, muddy. And I was shimming down the hill, ran around the arch, talked about feeling the great weight of the arch, and then ran home. And that was the end of the performance. But the whole idea of going into the picture, you could say that the artists really had been emphasizing, like Richard Serra, the materiality of the object. You know, when someone says, you know, it is 200 pounds of whatever, and that's what it is, and that's all it is. And I come along, my generation comes along in 1970, early 70s, and art's basic. Painting is dead. God is dead. That was the cover of one of the Time magazine, Is God Dead? And no one, I mean, we were not painters, we were conceptual artists, and then the object had been reduced to the idea with conceptual art. And so Lawrence Weiner had said one doesn't have to make the work can exist simply as a proposition. And so then I come along, and my generation comes along, so what are we supposed to do? I mean, really, it's all been done. I mean, they just put the lid on it. It's finished. It's toast. It's done. It's a package. It's perfect. And so what I thought was that, okay, they're all talking about this whiteboard, and it is perfect. A whiteboard is perfect. And they're doing all kinds of things with the whiteboard. But what I was interested in was not the board itself, not the physical element of the picture, but to go inside the picture, which means that you're going into, and mirrors were very popular material. Robert Smithson, Joan Jonas, many artists work with mirrors because of the illusion. But what happens when you when you go into the mirror, into the picture? You're not dealing with the surface anymore. You're dealing with the psyche of the object, the psyche of the individual, of the place. So that's how I felt at the time. So that's what this was all about. You could say that if I go from here, I have, this is the photo, but then over here you have the film, and then you have over here, I had the theater, and then you'd have, which would have dance and music and as I said, theater, and then world framed, where it's just the idea of framing anything in the world, and then the world unframed, which is basically without subject, and then that would come back to the circle, square, triangle. So it becomes a big circular chart. And I have one of those downstairs. So this breaking, this kind of pulling apart. Now, one of the things I did a performance at Artist Space where there was a drawing of the entrance to hell. Now, I was doing all these details of the cosmology, and it was of heaven and God and demons and angels and all this stuff, and hell. This was the entrance to hell. And I got in trouble for making these works, I felt, because they were so hot. And so kind of ridiculous in a way, the entrance to hell. And then and I'll go into that later, but I projected my mind's eye into this drawing, and when I went in, I thought it was a little chute, like this, and I would go like this, and then I could describe to the audience what I was feeling. But when I entered the picture, everything was red. Everything was red, and then as I went in, I realized that this was 1 kilometer wide. And I was floating in the sky, and I was slowly coming down to the edge of these rocks. And in the rock, there was a perfect etched line that covers a perfect circle. And so I go down to the edge, and there's a line right in front of me, and I put my foot, and it starts to slide. And I just goes like this. And so I start to slide all along, and I go around in a circle, around this giant crater. And it's like, like in those the track bikes, going very, very fast this way and slowly going down. So it was like going like this, and I was describing how it felt. I was interested in the smell, the taste, the sound. It was very loud. It was as if someone had filled a giant humidifier with blood, and that blood was everywhere. It was like a fog that was not of water but of blood. So your body, as soon as you walk in, your body turned red from that. And I was going around and around and around, and it was getting smaller and smaller and smaller and tighter and tighter and tighter, and it was like getting me into little bits and little bits and little bits, and I was disappearing slowly. And the only thing, I didn't feel any pain, but I was describing pain, but I wasn't feeling it. But I was going down and down and down, and I became this little bit of shit at the bottom of that tube. And it's like when I had my kids and they had their first shits. There was this black little goo, and it was like that. That's what I was becoming, a fetus shit. It was a little black thing. And then what happened was that I disappeared. But I was still in this place, and I still had an audience, and I was still inside the picture, so I reappeared. And then when I reappeared, I was falling. And I was falling through sky, and there was all around me giant balls, giant chrome balls. This was in 1976. And I was going past them. There was a huge girder, a giant girder, sticking up out of the ground. And I was coming down, and of course, it was right heading for my balls. And I was coming down, and it cut me in half. And it cut me right through my balls, right through my ass, up through my stomach, and through my rib cage and my sternum, up through my neck, and up through the top of my head, and I became two halves calling down to earth. Two halves coming down. And then I hit a soft ground. It was soft, because when I hit the ground, I didn't hit a hard thing. It was soft. I remember saying that. And I said, this is finished. The performance is over. This was about, this whole little piece lasted about 20 minutes. So it was really a lot more detail about what was happening. And so actually a man comes up to me, Douglas Crimp, who was a critic of this generation, and he said, God, that looked a lot like William Blake. You really must love William Blake. And I said, no, that's not what I didn't want to have that association. I didn't want to have the William Blake association with this piece. And then this woman comes up to me and she says, okay, I know what this is. She had it all figured out. A young Japanese woman. She comes up to me and says, okay, so where were you born? She said. And I said, I was born in Santa Monica Hospital in California, in LA. And she says, okay, I think that this was Santa Monica Hospital. This is a birth trauma. First of all, you're in a big, red, round area, and you're getting tighter and tighter, and there's blood everywhere, and you feel it, and you have this translucence, this red coming out everywhere, and you're getting tighter and tighter and smaller and smaller and smaller, and then all of a sudden you're free, and there's chrome balls, and it's like lights, she says. And then she said, yeah, and then you're cut in half, and you're put on a soft bed. And that's it. That's the Santa Monica Hospital. That's what that is. And I said, yeah, that's a great idea. Great idea. And I always thought it was very much, and I said, when she said, what do you think? And I said, well, I think it's like jumping down my own throat. It's like the Fantastic Voyage, that movie from the 60s where you go down, when you're being injected into your own arm, and you're going into your own veins. But in any case, what happened later on after that is that the image of hell becomes this image, becomes the hell figure, which is the squatting man, which is, in a sense, even later on becomes even more fetal-like. And that's how that comes up from this performance. So about 2 months later, I'm invited to do a group exhibition, at Hall Walls, which is a gallery in Buffalo, New York, that was run by Robert Longo, Cindy Sherman, and Michael Zwack, and Charlie Clough. And we go up there, and I'm in a show from Artist Space, and the group is David Sally and myself and Troy Brontek and Jack Goldstein. And we go up there and do an exhibition, and I was going to be doing a performance, and it was going to be going to heaven. Since I went to hell at Artist Space, I was going to go to heaven in Buffalo. So I had this drawing of a mountainscape with mist, very romantic rapidograph drawing of the edge of heaven that I had drawn. So I thought, well, okay. So I went into that picture of heaven, and I thought I'd have 20 minutes. Like I did, I had 20 minutes of going into hell. I thought I had 20 minutes. So I go into that drawing, and immediately I see that it's wrong, totally wrong. Heaven is not this at all. So heaven is a ball. That's what I say. Heaven's a ball, and heaven is a ball that changes with my feelings. So I am the space in that ball, and that's all that exists, period. There's nothing else. That is the universe. And as my feelings change, the colors inside that ball change with it. So if I'm happy, it becomes yellow or pink. If I'm sad, it becomes green or blue. I mean, so trite, but it's like that. It just follows me. Rather than the world create my feelings, my feelings create the world, and that's the end of the performance. That was heaven. Okay, heaven is this ball that you're in, and it's the other way around, and that's all there is, and that's heaven. So that lasted 2 minutes, and then it was finished. But what happened is that the sign for heaven becomes the target. So that's the sign for heaven. You'll see it again. And then I have a sign for God later on, which is the man turning into the target. But that you'll see that in slides. So now I have this kind of science, I have this progression of media that I was interested in relation to this idea of empathy, that you can identify with the empathy of the stick figure pricking his finger or pinching his arm. Also, when someone says, pinch me, I have to make sure I'm not dreaming. Pinch me. That is what a weird thing. But that's the first thing Glenn does, is to pinch himself. So I have this cosmology that is getting more detailed. I have this media. My first show at Artist Space was a variety of media in a row, in a room, following an order. This order that I described was going around a gallery, and I'd have photographs and symbols broken up, and text, and it was all going in this order. And then I had this idea that if I have a sign of a person like this, what happens if I take it off the sheet of paper and I make a poster out of it? It changes the sign. Or if I make a flag out of it. And so then I went to a Graphis annual, where it had a table of contents of all these different ways that symbols can be treated in the design world. From book covers to posters to letterheads to all these packaging designs for liquor, for whatever. But I went through the list of the table of contents, and then at the same time I went to the telephone book of a flag shop. And the flag shop, they made pennants, they made banners, they made flags, they made trophies, they made socks, they made buttons, they made patches, they made all this stuff. And I thought, well, I'm going to make all of those things as well. Because it stopped to be about the actual meaning of the sign, it became about the context of the sign. Now, the Warhol's shadow, this was in 1977. So Warhol shadow, before that point, as a young artist, you couldn't really get close to certain things, like you couldn't do packaging because that was Warhol. You couldn't do pop art stuff. But by the late 70s, it was available. You somehow felt you could do it. And anyway, I was dealing with something very different. I was doing with a table of contents of packaging. I was in a group show in San Francisco, and I made all these buttons as a pile. And I had them on display as a sculpture. And they were all taken within 10 minutes. They were the trompe-l'oeil of it was such that I looked at it as an object. And not even the people that had the gallery understood that this was an object not to be touched. It was to be looked at. And everyone grabbed one. By the end of the first 10 minutes, I didn't have a sculpture anymore. Because they played into how it represented. I even had a show just 2 years ago in Berlin, and I had a bag of buttons in the show. And they had to kind of track people because people would open the bag and grab a button, even if it was an object, because the impulse to grab it, there's a familiarity with a button that everybody has them, and it's hard not to just grab it. So that's what the flags are about. It's about how we respond to it. The adjective of the material as it is approaching the sign. So in 1980, what happened was that there was a bunch of us living in what now is called the Pictures generation. There was an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum with the catalog. But what happened in 1980 is that all these galleries opened up at the same time, within months of each other. And where you never had a gallery up to that point, then galleries changed, and then people started to make paintings. Paintings became popular, and everything switched around. And my first show, I chose Mary Boone, and my first show where I had posters, I had flags, I had a bulletin board covered with pictures. I had what I wanted to call them illustrations, and Mary hated that word. She didn't want me to call them illustrations, she wanted me to call them drawings. And then I had a chart, and I had these international signs, a la, international signs, and a head and body. And people thought it was a group show. They didn't understand it as a one-person show. They thought it because there was not so much connecting them. So that's in 1980, and then it would continued where I was dealing with the different kinds of language, from popular to spiritual, you could say, to very personal, and different kinds of forms. So I was getting into stone, etched stone, and I even got into stained glass windows, and into crocheting, and into tapestries. So I was dealing with, I was doing performances where I was performing dance pieces, musical pieces. I was dealing also, the first time I hired a hypnotist, as I said, I hired a hypnotist and several actors to act out, and I was called a fascist by people in the audience. So people got really upset with me because I was controlling these actors to believe that they were dying, or that they were in love, or whatever, and they thought that I was manipulating. And we'll do the slides, and we'll get off of the screen here, and we'll go to the screen up here. And we can reduce the lights a little bit. Okay, so too bad I don't have I should have a little laser beam, but that's okay. These are the color aid cards. This is my studio. It's in a basement. There's a little foam core, a little foam man, like Brancusi type figure. And here is a Death's Cape, which I've used in different performances. And the performance with now this is helping my memory. So I'm seeing the Death's Cape, and it was a performance that I did the same night that I entered the Hell picture, where I asked for a volunteer from the audience to play death. And then I stuffed my mouth with gauze, I lied down on the floor, and people were laughing about it. And a woman dressed completely in white with a white glove is a friend of mine. Her name was Pamela, and she volunteered to play death. She didn't understand because I didn't say any words. I only drew pictures to define what I wanted. And I drew a drawing of death that looked like death looks like this. And I drew it like, no, it was like this, and he had a black thing, and then the person where the mouth was open had X for eyes. You know, so that represents death. When you have, isn't it interesting? The X for eyes is death. And then they pull the soul out of the mouth for 3 minutes. I had 3 minutes on the clock. And she understood it, but I don't think she understood that this was death. So she covered, and people were laughing when I was doing this drawing. And all these performances, I had volunteers from the audience perform for themselves. And I just constructed it. So she put the black thing over, she sat there, and then she slowly, for 3 minutes, pulled this fabric out of my mouth. And you could hear a pin drop, because what was happening was that death was pulling the soul out of a dead man, and it was Pamela and myself at Artist Space with a piece of gauze coming out of my mouth. The two were presented, not one they were next to each other. One was not on top, not one was below. They were next. It made it more real. Now that's Death's Cape. This is the soul being stretched between a demon and an angel, which was a piece that I would string on the ceiling. John Baldessari came to visit me in this studio space, and he was a big sheet on my ceiling, and he asked what it was, and I said, that's a soul being stretched between a demon and an angel, and he shrugged. He thought it was funny. He thought it was cute. And so that was there. So, but that's here. This is this part. And then I have, these are all the stick figure drawings, and then these are all the rapidographic drawings, and then it's all the photograph there. And then on the very top, you see you have my deodorant and my pimple cream and my bills. That's the real life part up there. That's the top, was the real life. And so this is what I used in order to segregate all my stuff. And I was interested in the representation of the segregation. This is almost like a sculpture in itself, representing the work as a group. Next. This is a drawing of fictional landscape, looking from the house on, looking through a fictional landscape there, it says, looking at the house on the left to the house on the right. So I went into the picture and I did a drawing of what it would be like to be inside the picture looking at a drawing. So it's like going into the picture virtually. Yeah, okay, next. This is tearing Death's Cape up into little pieces and putting it near the corner of my studio, in my studio. Now, this is like what Sarah and Levay and all those artists were trying to do, and what they did do was to remove allegory from the object, metaphor from the object. Not metaphor, but allegory. And so what I did is that I did the absolute opposite of what they were trying to do by proclaiming it to be Deathscape. It was the opposite. You couldn't be further away from Sarah. He has all these adjectives for what he does to material, and I applied them to Deathscape, just as a way of saying that's not all there is. Next. This is a feather from an angel's wing. And of course, the angel is above the picture where angels are. And so it's a way in. It's a way from the outside. Next. These are, this is actually from later on, which are little pendants, which I designed when I did the Buffalo show. Next. This is a soul being stretched between a demon and the angel. This is the drawing of it. So if I had this drawing on the wall and then I had a sheet pulled in front of it, then you'd understand what the sheet was by the drawing itself. And this is a performance where I would ask 2 volunteers from the audience with a bed sheet, and I draw a line on the floor, and then they do a tug of war. And the demon usually won. The demon usually won the tug of war. Next. And here you have the cosmology, where you have, before I'm born, I choose my parents, and then there's Mullican, and I die at 2023 there, or 22. See, it's getting close. It's like 12 years from now. Back then it was, and then he comes down and talks to death, and they decide if I go up to heaven or hell. But you see that Y shape? That was the same Y shape that's here, between the subject and the object. Because heaven really becomes about the subject and hell the object. And it's not so much, my heaven and hell is not good and evil, it's subject-object. So the body would be down here and the mind would be up there. Next. And this is the cadaver. And, you know, my hand in his mouth, as I said, covering his eyes, his shouting in his ear. And it's a pretty, he's in the show in Belgium. I show him often. And a lot of times he's next to a doll's head. There's another slide where you'll see him in a bulletin board with a doll's head. Next. And then this is a person that was not important in the comic. And I just talk about his eventual death. So it really goes into like when Betty Boop comes out of the pen of the cartoonist and talks back to him. In a sense, I'm going into the picture and then giving him a purpose. He's an extra. He has no purpose whatsoever. He's a small person in the whole schema of the story. And I talked about his eventual death. Next. And then I did a piece where and this is a typewriter page where I collected dead cartoon characters. And this is just, I don't think my eyes are good enough to read it, but oh brother, what a nuisance. Now the crazy old gaffer gone and died on me. So it's a dead man in a comic strip. Next. This is Headache. This is a piece from, I think, 74. And it disappeared as soon as I made it. I took a picture and it was gone. It's plasticine. Next. And then I made these stuffed people. I had one like this, and I had one that was a head and body, and then I had one that was just a body. And I slept with them. And I had them in my bed with me. And, you know, I was just the mechanics of getting attached to the symbol, you could say. They don't exist anymore, but that was, again, this is mid-70s. Next. And I bought this sign at a stationery store, and I just put it up on the wall at the show on Hall Walls. I made a plastic thing for it, and I just put it up. Next. This is the colored, this is the broken up, where I have another sheet with a yellow square on it. And you know that yellow square is a body because you see it here. And you know that red circle over there on that wall is a head because it says so here. because at one point it was told to me when I was in school that at the basis of all language are words. And you could say that this is a word to describe arms, legs, body, and head. But that word is not a phonetical word. It's a word that is a picture word. It's a silent word. And it's not a word that I can repeat in my head. And yet it somehow made it possible to say that language and information is not based in words. And this, again, is in the mid-70s. And then the pictographic language was becoming more and more important in my work. And it had to do with that distrust of, or not distrust of words, but just this issue with them. I've had, in reading certain texts having to do with information and thought, that there's this Temple Grandin Smith, who is autistic and who is a vet, has been talking about being autistic. She's mildly autistic. And she says that she thinks in pictures. She does not think in words, as if I thought in words. And I do not think in words. I don't think the thought process is involved with words. I think if I'm solving a problem, I'm not reading a text in my brain having to solve the problem. Solving the problem is very much like, it's very intuitive. I think mathematicians will say that when you, and this in regards to the show, is that a lot of it it's very much on, the relationships are based on feelings that you have. This feels right. You know, this just feels right. I don't know why, but it feels right. And that is like what thought is. That's what thought is. I mean, when you have a tennis player, it's a highly strategic game. And you're thinking, but you're not thinking anywhere near the speed of having to recite anything with words. You're thinking on a much higher level, and a much faster level. I think thought is more closely related in terms of a description to music. I think thought and music are more closely related than thought and words, although that would be tough. Many people would argue with that point to the death, but because they would talk about what kind of thought are you talking about? Are you talking, obviously I'm talking to you, transferring it, but when I'm talking about thought, I'm going back. And that's what I'm doing in this early stage. I'm on to something having to do with language and with expression. Next. Here's a head and body there. And there's a face, and then a man in the landscape. Now, the man in the landscape is just a symbol with a sky and a ground. The artist that would relate to would be Joel Shapiro, or any number, or perhaps even Bill Bollinger, after he did the minimalist work, was doing representational. There was a pullback towards representational art in the early 70s, after the kind of the absolute craziness of abstraction and materiality of the late 60s. And again, I'm saying it's a head and body. I mean, we're going to have hard to say it's Glenn. This is my buddy. You know, the projection is such. This is, again, my studio. Next. Head and body, or yeah, that's a folded newspaper. Next. And that's telling you what it is. That's the title. Yeah. Next. This slide, I'm sorry, is backwards, but it starts off with the photos. It's at Hall Walls. And so you have, as I had the photograph before the drawing, there's the cadaver, the full cadaver, and the doll and the dead man. And I put them up like a bulletin board. That was the first time I did that. I didn't want to put the photographs up like in rows. I wanted to put them up scattershot, very much like the idea of the way one would put up the photographs on a refrigerator, or on a board in a dormitory. And that would be important. And then from the photographs of the real world to the drawings of heaven and hell and science fiction and then fiction. Next. And then it leads from that to here, where you have the sign symbols, and then it breaks down into the signs in a t-shirt, here, patches, pennants, packaging, armbands, flags, and so forth. Next. And then it goes from there into the head and body here, and then you can see there's a record cover, and there's a box for wine, and then here you have heaven, sky, ground, and hell, and a pattern, and then this is a book where you have little signs here, and that will describe to you what they represent in the book with pictures, more pictures. And Douglas Crimp, who saw this show, and he thought that my work looked like a dormitory room, the way the pictures were all on like posters that a child would take away with him. And I thought that was really, really sweet, because it was true. I'm very much interested in the way people identify themselves with pictures. And I think it's the first art. The art that we all do, we don't think it's art at all, which is how we gather images around ourselves that are important to us. Our families, our superstars, our politicians, our spiritual guides that we have around us, our movie stars, that kids really are into, more than adults. But it's the first art. I think it's the art of gathering and curating. Next. There's the heaven and hell with the sign. Next. That's that progression of media that I talked about. Film, writing, so forth. And then texture, pattern, smell, taste, emptiness. Next. There's a bulletin board. My first show at Mary Boone, I had a board like this, and I could do whatever I wanted. And I just covered it with these pictures. And some of them are very important, and some of them don't mean anything at all. Just things I picked up off the street. But it's everything becomes equalized. Everything. I can have a photograph of my parents next to a photograph of someone who I don't know who they are, and they all become equalized. Next. That's the finger in the dead man's mouth. Next. And then I was doing these signs. This is more like 83 or 84. And, yeah, 83. And you see the sign of subject, which is the brain, and the sign of object, circle, square, triangle. And then the colors have meaning. This is 82, actually. So this is red, subject, black, language, yellow, world, frame, and green is elements. So you have death in the green area. And then you have this menu on top, where I was interested in how the top would somehow signify the bottom. And it really, people were talking about Egypt when they were talking about this work. They were I was in a show, and they were talking all about, and I said Egypt, and hieroglyphics, and pictograms, and modernism, like any number of people. And it's so obviously having to do with the you might say, the internet, or with the computer interface. A friend, someone who I met recently saw, she was at a party with me some like 8 years ago, and it was an opening party for Cindy Sherman, and we were sitting at the same table, and she says, and she wrote for Art and Antiques, and she says, I just thought about you, and I haven't thought about you in years. And that's how that was a compliment, that she had thought about me. And she said, look, I just got a television, and I turned it on, and there was your work on the TV. All these signs were all over the TV, and I didn't know what to do with it. I had no idea what they were talking about, and I thought of you, and I said, God, he knew what he was doing. But back then, you didn't have that problem. But the problem is certainly what I was talking about, because an artist anticipates or deals with the zeitgeist at a young level. So that's what this is. This is the beginning of that. We're going to start going quickly now. Next. The posters, Heaven and Life, and Subject, Demon and Angel, and so forth. Next, 1984. This is the first show at Mary Boone, 1980, where I had the flags and the posters, but on the other side I had drawings, and I had these the bulletin board. Next. Yeah. Next. Mullican Life. Next. And then you have the chart above, and then the elements below, and then the house in the middle. So it's a breaking up. It's trying to segregate the signs in different kinds of reality. And on top is the subjective, and I put the cosmology up there. Then I have the history of the world, and then I have the cityscape, and then down below I have nature and the skull and so forth. Next, Mullican death. Next. And then this is another one of those drawings that I did. And it really comes out of the heaven above, hell below thing. But it's not. Next. I did a stained glass with the thing. If you see, this floor is a terracotta floor. And Mary had changed the gallery. She had a wooden floor, and she decided she wanted to have a terracotta floor because she thought the terracotta would make the art more important. Somehow it would make it more religious, more spiritual, that she had a terracotta floor. So when she did this, I said, okay, I'm going to build you a stained glass window to put in your gallery. So I made this glass window for her gallery just for my show, but it was really playing off of what she was doing with the floor and how it changed it. I'm still uncomfortable with this glass, the stained glass. Leaded glass windows are kind of over the top the way God is and the way that whole thing. And so it's just, I'm just going there, you know, and I've been in trouble ever since, you know. Next. And here you have a lot of glass. I did these in Vienna, and then here's a model, a city plan based on that, on those levels. And here you have the different levels. Again, subject, language, world framed, world unframed, and elements. Next. And here you have, this is a carpet that I made, and this is the Hirshhorn Museum. And it's like a big game board. And the gaming, this game kind of issue becomes important in the work because I have all these rules. Next. Again, like this with the city plan. Next. And this is this is a Munster sculpture project, 1987. And this is at this Chemistry Institute. And on this side, you have isotopic. Isotopic's that side. Inorganic is this side. Organic is that building. And the library is here. And I've oriented this chart to those buildings. Next. And again, etched granite. It represents foreverness. That's the thing about etched granite. It is not forever at all. In fact, my Munster piece is a ruin from trucks driving over it. And they have to rebuild a third of it, and they have to move it. They are moving it around and so forth. But again, it's a very, and the first time I did it, I had the cosmology, my fictional cosmology, and I put it in stone. And the people that were laughing, they were enjoying it because they saw that what they were doing, that they were making something that was completely a fiction into something more real by putting it in etched stone. Because when you see the sign in stone, it makes it more powerful. It makes it more important because it's expensive and it's heavy. And it's and that's the way people think. Next. This is in Bath, England, and I did this Bath stone. This is part of ArtSite. Sean Kelly was running it at that point, and this was a project I did for him. This is all etched. I mean, this is hand carved out of Bath stone. Next, and this is the chart. Again, you have, this is glass I did for, this is in Holland, in The Hague. The Hague has, the Gementa Museum has this piece. I made it for them. Next. Okay, another chart, very similar. Next. Okay, and then you have this. Let's go back two slides, please. Now, one more. Okay, now, red, black, yellow, blue, and green. Now, someone have some keys. I'm going to demonstrate what these 4, 5 worlds mean. Keys. Anybody have some keys? Keys. Ah, keys. You're very fast. Very good. Okay, so the 3 keys, 3 different metals. Okay, in the green area, I'm going to say that that is an atomic frying pan. Super, super hot. Hotter than anything on the planet. This is an atomic frying pan. I think Chris Burden did something with it. And it is super, super hot. So you throw the keys into the frying pan, and immediately, if there's any plastic, it's gone. And the softer metal, and all the keys warp. They warp. As soon as they hit it, they're no longer keys because they don't longer open anything. And now, is a key in its function or a key in its image? So the fact that the key doesn't work anymore, is it still a key? So I would say that if the key is not functioning as a key, it remains, but only as an image. So, okay, first the softer metal melts, and then the harder metal melts, and then eventually it's a puddle. They all combine, and then within 10 minutes, they disappear. They're vaporized. And so that's here. That's material without meaning. That's at the end of all my work is green. It's green. Green represents materiality. Then there's the blue area. And that's these keys when they were 10 minutes ago. These keys 10 minutes ago in the pocket of the person who gave them to me, that would be the blue. That's the keys when they're in your pocket right now. The keys when you open your door when you come home tonight. You might think about this little demonstration. Now when you pull them out, you can look at them. Now when you look at them, you take them out of your pocket, and you're thinking about me talking about them, they're no longer in the blue area, they become in the yellow area. And the yellow is when they become important. Symbolically important. So I can say that these keys, not very many of them, but these are some of the keys that belong to Elvis Presley. And they are at auction. They are at auction at Christie's, and they're expected to bring several $100,000. Because these were his own keys that he held, that he opened his own doors with every night because he was paranoid. And he opened and locked, made sure all the doors were locked when they had to be locked. He himself had to do that. He was very clean about that. And he did that. And these keys, now, all the doors have been changed, so the keys no longer function. But he himself, these keys belong to him and they're at auction, so they are here. They cease to be, they're no longer real, they've become something else. Now you go to the black area, and that's the auction catalog. Ooh, boy, these are cool looking, I have to get those. And that's the auction, that's the black and the white area, that's language. And then the reason that I asked for your keys is because I hate keys. The reason I hate keys, I was mugged trying to open up my door in Soho once because I was flopping through my keys trying to figure it out which key was the right key with my groceries, and that was in the red area. The fact that I hate keys, all keys, I hate keys in images, I hate keys in my pocket, I do not like keys. And that is the red. So red is the subjective. Red is the brain. That is the hatred of keys. Green is the material of those keys without meaning. So this is meaning without material and material without meaning. And this is the crossover between object to subject, and it crosses through the yellow, which is the world framed. And all my charts, you'll see again and again and again, and all the color systems again and again and again. That system was pretty much invented in 83. This is someone's keys. Next. And there it is. See the melted keys? There we are, the body coming down with the material. And then above you have the cosmology, and always the cosmology was the representation of the keys, of the subject. And not only recently does the hypnosis really enter into it. Next. And then putting this glass into an architecture. In the late 80s, I started doing a lot of public work. Mid-late 80s, those granite pieces I showed you and things like this. Next. These flags, this is at the Magasin, and it's a gallery in Grenoble. And it's the gallery, it's a Magasin, is where Eiffel Tower built the Eiffel, where the Eiffel built the Eiffel Tower. It was built in this building, and it's a gallery. So I don't know what you're expected to show there, because the building dwarfs everything that's in there. It looks tiny, but I actually addressed the scale. So I made these banners, and I hung them so they become these rooms inside that you are walking. One of these banners could fit into a box about like this. So they really compress into nothing, and there's only one layer, so it's like they glow. If there's light going through them, they glow. And you have red, cosmology, and then language, world framed, world unframed, and then the one that's missing is the green. And it's really about language and architecture. And again, this is really the beginnings of the computer, more and more and more. Next. And then I had these banners I made for the first show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA. And they were, each and every one of them was slashed. when it was shown there in Los Angeles, the opening show in Los Angeles. And they were then repaired. But when they have it on film, the guy going down to each banner and slicing it with a razor blade, because they were very available. They were really, you could touch them. And when they were being cut, that's the demon and the angel, that's fate, that's life, no, that's death, and that's life over there, and that's before birth. So they're in an order. But the guy didn't know what he was slicing. I don't think he was aware that he was slicing God or heaven or hell or whatever. He was simply slicing a banner that represented the new museum. That's what he was slicing. The cosmology, as I said, of contemporary art is more of a cosmology that I live by than by my view up there. This was in Berlin in 95. I had a show at the National Gallery, and then also I had these banners at Alexanderplatz. This is during the same time as the Christo wrapping the Reichstag, and they wanted these big artworks in Berlin. So, and of course in Berlin, you would have thought that there would be this big outrage about red, black, and white banners in a row like this, but no one even thought about it. You know, they really didn't. Next. And then I was making these rubbings. Now, this was, in the early, you'll see these drawings out front in the big wall that look like rubbings. And I was doing these drawings, and I didn't know what I was doing. And then I went to the museum, the Boston Museum of Art, and I saw a rubbing, a Chinese rubbing from a couple of thousand years ago. And it is the first form of reproducible media. It is absolutely the earliest form of reproducible media. And it's frottage. And so I started to make them. Now, this is actually in a school in Tourcoing, and it has the different, there's history, language, and the city here, and then evolution down below. And this is in this art school. Next. And here's another hierarchical situation where you have solids and liquids, and then you have third class, where you have approximately 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 20 people in a room. And then you have second class where you have a bunk bed. And then you have first class where you have your own bed and your own sitting room and your own bathroom. And then you go above that and you go into these large kind of club rooms. And then you have the restaurant. And then on the very top you have the gallery. Art gallery is on top. And above that you have that stained glass window. Now, I didn't invent this. This was a 1919 Italian steamship. It was a cutaway out of a book that I thought would be appropriate. When I was talking about looking at you and saying that you were no different from what was on the floor with the light patterns, that basically the bodies here are closer related to solids and liquids, mostly liquid, and then the bodies up there are mostly related to the artwork or to sublime, the sublime individual. And it's all, of course, hierarchically described. Next. This is the Dallas project, which that's the opera house, the arts, the city, the man broken up in the same pattern as the city, evolution, and so forth. It's approximately 16 feet high and about 110 feet long. Next. And there's almost the whole thing. There's another section. Next. And again, it's the, this is in Manchester. And this was it Corner House in Manchester? I think it's Corner House. This was an exhibition I was in, and this is the city plan. And what it was is that I had an exhibition where I wanted, it was in LA, and I wanted to apply those 5 worlds into a kind of a cityscape that would describe it. So it's a city that's similar to a World's Fair site. Next. So you could see it here, where I have the meaning up above and then down below the place. And a company saw this, a company that works with, had a supercomputer, had a Cray supercomputer. And they were called, God, what were they called? I forgot. But they did graphics, they did computer graphics for CBS and for NBC. They did the elections that year. And in any case, they said, would you like to walk down into your city? Would you like to walk down that street? And I said, fantastic, you know, because I was talking about the stick figures and going into the picture and walking into the picture. They said, well, we can do it. We can go into, we can do it. We'd like to work with you. Would you be interested to do that? And I said, fine. And so next. And this was the first one they did. This was a 35 millimeter slide, and it was done with the Cray supercomputer. And this was like 1986. There are no scan lines. That was the big deal. And the computer itself was about the size of this light. And it was designed like a couch. So you could sit on the computer. And it was in a room. Now the thing about it is that all the information had to go through one funnel. And then you had a room over there that was twice the size of this whole auditorium. And that room had the air conditioner that kept that little thing cold. Because the information was going so fast, and you could be in with the computer, you didn't have to dress up. But to go into the other room, you had to be in those white suits. And it was really from 2001. It was fantastic. So this was something we just put together very quickly. It was the very first one. And then it continued. Let's next, please. Oh, this is the story. This is the flag that should have been earlier. That's just a banner I made in India, but it had the 5 worlds. Next. And then you have this. This is the Museum of Modern Art. And I made the Cityscape based on the 5 worlds. And there are 5 worlds, each defining the whole in a different way. And there are 1.5 million polygons on this poster to describe it. There's an absolute representation of the same, except for the middle, in the middle. That really doubles your polygon count. So there's really more like 600 and something. But when you double it there, it becomes 1 million, too. Next. And that's inside one of those buildings. Why don't you go back one. Those are all houses. And we were going into one of those little houses there, and that's what we were inside that other place. Next. Next. And these are some rocks that you have where this is later on in the project. I wanted to do a visual of the rocks. And then next, we made this project where you got the data that made the pictured rocks, and it made these. This is in 1991. These lasography rocks. So it was like reaching into the picture and pulling out the rock, and you could see it. And so these are these rocks that are made of with the scan lines. So the pictures were becoming real. Next. And this is where you have the models in the middle. I had the big poster there, and these are all lightbox details of the data itself, and a big plotter drawing. This is at Porticus, and the video of going through this thing. And people thought that these were stills from the video, and this is a poster for the video, that the video somehow gains a lot of power. But all the different materials were basically defining and describing the database. The database was, in a sense, becoming the brain. The mind. That is what I was interested in, how the database becomes the source of the material, as I was saying about conceptual art. Next. And this is the next project that I did, where you had the show, that was at the Magasin, that computer project. And then the French Ministry of Culture said, would I like to make something with them? And I said, yes, I'd like to make it a virtual city. And so this is the living room of a house in the virtual environment where everything could be moved. I had the gloves and I had the thing, and I could walk in for hours. So this was a complete virtual environment. Next. That's another detail from the virtual environment from the early 90s. And I wanted to make it really simple. Next. This is from the last project. This is a cemetery, a hospital, and a prison, and it's a kind of a real estate nightmare and a homeless shelter. This is really in the chart where the keys are really almost melted. Is the bottom of the chart. That's why it's turned to green. Now and see all the gravestones? I mean, they're really, and there's the crematorium there, and there's the little sign for the hospital, and the little sign for the prison. It's like a big Monopoly game that one could walk through. But you couldn't walk through this city, but the next one you could. Next. And then this is the objects from the city, the next project, which is the MIT. Next. And this is the inside of the MIT where you have the stained glass. Next. And the bulletin boards are inside the MIT project. Next. And there you have you see the boards are inside this. This comes in after the computer. I started to build this architecture. This really comes in after it because the architecture really follows the computer imagery. This is a concrete chart. Now, a chart or a map is intrinsically a weightless thing. It has no mass. It doesn't need a mass. You have your little map on your iPhone to find out where you are. There's no physicality to that map. So, but I wanted to make a map that, and this weighed 150 tons, this map. And it took 3 trucks, and it was propped up, and this relationship to information and the heaviness of it. And it was wonderful because you could jump. The kids loved hopping around this. This is the Kroller-Müller Museum in Otterlo. Next. And this is the MIT where you'd have the skeleton. The keys in the green area where they were melted, that's the skeleton of a cat, a dog, and a human. And then you have the world unframed, and then the framed in the middle, and then the red was empty. Next. Next, please. And this is at this is at Documenta, where you have from above you see it. This is in the early 90s, and you can see construction. But when you go inside it, it changes. Next, and it becomes abstract. And then inside, now go back again, please. Go back. And you'll see the bulletin boards are in the rooms. So first you have the hole, and then you have the room, and then you have the board, and then you have the picture on the board, and then you have the picture in the picture on the board. So you have 5 generations of going in. So it's an architecture that really is defining this experience of going into the data. And you see the entire logo, and you're really getting smaller. Next. And it becomes abstract. Next. And then I did a show at Barbara Gladstone where I did the same thing. Next. And this is flowers I did in Antwerp. That's a sign for sign. Next. And this was a big stone floor which is still there. If you go to the Unisphere, I have this big etching having to do with the description of the 39 and 64 World's Fairs. Because of my interest in World's Fair sites coming from the city, I did this big project there, which was a wonderful experience. And then rollerbladers love to go rollerblading because this is all granite. It's the smoothest surface, and they're kind of flying over all these landscapes. I have the history of World's Fairs above, the history of the site where they are there, and then the 2 interfaces in between. Next. And this is a sculpture based on those 5 levels. This is in Zug, Switzerland. It has 1, 2, and 3 parts. Next. And that's the subject, language, world framed, world unframed, and elements. Next. And, and then drawing on the balls, ways, because if you draw a chart that's flat on a ball, it changes. You don't have any up, down, left, or right. Everything switches around. It's a fundamentally different experience. And initially, these were all, in a way, talking with the people with the virtual reality. They thought it would be fantastic that the interface would be a ball that we would see in the virtual space, that we could access all our information that way. Next. And this is a detail of these tubes where the information is really changing. Now this is actually doesn't include the last 15 years. This is a while ago. I have to update the slides, but now I'd like to go to the first video. I think we have time, yeah. And the first video I'm going to show is what the French ministry and I did together in 91, 92. And it was done, it can never be reproduced It'd have to be built from scratch because, like all computer work, it was done for a particular machine that doesn't exist anymore. And the data had to be created as we went along. For the computer project, truly it was done on a connections machine. And when they were building all those images, I had a programmer that was ahead of me, making it so they could make shadows and they could do light. He was Carl Sims was the guy working on the project. So here we are on the outside. The actual cityscape is in the middle, and I built this big square in order so I wouldn't get lost. Because if you go out into the gray area, like for miles, you can go on forever. And then this big square becomes a tiny little dot, and then you're lost forever. You're just going to be lost. So I put this landscape around it in order to find it if I was to get off. So if the world is flat, this is it. And then in the middle, you have the city, and the city is green. The whole thing is green. And then you have this little, let's go a little faster. One, good, that's good. We'll just go one. And I'm moving my head. I have the goggles, and I have a glove. And so that's controlling me as I go in here. Okay, so now you see the whole city. And let's keep going, and then we can slow down. Now we can slow down to normal speed. And you'll see a glove somewhere in here, but I'm floating with all the, and the whole idea is that one could construct. So this would be the part of the keys where they're melted, and you just have these molecule type things. And you can see me looking down and around. And I actually didn't have the gloves. I was doing it with a cursor. But I did have my goggles on. And you'll see the gloves, they're floating around in here somewhere. Let's go faster. That's good. We'll just, I think level 1 is good. And you see there's a line, that half circle. On this side of that half circle, everything that looks, the world is this world. But if you cross that line, it'll change. And it'll change dramatically into another concept. And what happens when you cross the line. You'll see in a second where it will grow. It'll change totally. So there are 5 different areas, and there are 5 holes because each area defines the whole differently. So you might say that if you have a map and there's 100 sections, then if each section defines the whole differently, then there are 100 holes inside the one that shows them all. Okay, now let's, this is slow. Let's, we're going to get through this. Come on, let's go through it. See, as soon as, okay, I think, now we're going to turn, bam. Okay, so now we're in the next world. So we look back where we were, and you see that there's that wall, and this is the world unframed. So it has all the roads, and it has that's the cultural center, that's the government, there's the school, that's the business, and I designed it really Lego-like. I didn't want to have any texture mapping. I wanted it to look flat. I had that Legoland look, and so these are all these houses down here. There's the prison, and their hospital, and the cemetery, and the factory, and there's a hill over there where I go up to. And so now we're descending down into going into a house. So we're going to descend down. There's one house you can go into, and we're going to go down into it. Slowly but surely. There's the house. Okay. And there's some larger houses, and I'm still looking around. Initially, I had a pole. That would be the only way that you could get the bird's eye view, where you were stuck down below. But then I made it so you could fly. You had to be able to fly, otherwise it would take forever to get around. In the 90s, in the middle 90s up to now, I've been doing it. I'm working with doctors now. I have a Jungian analyst who I work with, and I have a doctor in New York. This is the New York. This is the Whitney biannual. whenever I come out within the audience situation, almost always I mark out my territory. I don't know why, but when you step out in that space, in a trance, you are, I don't know what to do. I have not a clue what I'm doing. I don't even know what I'm doing. And it's very much about the body, a very sensual experience. And look, I'm obviously want to protect, I'm like a child. I want to protect myself. And I'm hopping along. And I'm marking out my little area. I think the feedback's coming from me in my mind. And coffee. The little print I made is I love coffee, and he loves coffee. That person. That person, you could say, is somebody who's come up and over the years, and I call him that person basically because I don't know who he is really, and he could be a woman, could be a girl, could be a man, could be any kind of man, any kind of woman, and it could be a child. Most likely he is a child most of the time, and he is very much like, in some of the performances, maybe not this one, he's very much like an autistic. The different grades that are demonstrated through his behavior have been autism, compulsive behaviors, Tourette's, when you're shaking all the time, what's it called? And kind of a schizophrenic component. But the obsessive compulsive thing is very evident. He's just kind of getting used to being, and I've had doctors seeing these tapes, and they would say, so where did you study autism? So where were you looking at the people? Because you are so much like that. You got it down so close. Everything about what you do is like that. This idea that he's holding everything, and he likes to be held. And then look at what he's doing with his chin. He's moving his chin. Now, this whole body of work with the hypnosis, I have this very elaborate structure that I've created over many, many years. And this guy is a way out, or girl is a way out of that. Because I do not know what he is doing. I have theories about it, like he's getting a little bit faster, he's getting a little bit more dark and breathing is really important. And singing. I wanted to go through all the videos of me in a trance and take out all the songs, because he sings a lot. His singing is a way of communicating with the audience in a way. And when he talks, you see, he's going to read a coffee can. And it is something to see how he reads. Oh yeah, now he's getting on. Now that represents getting on the stage. That's like, we're all going to know, he's going to know he's getting on that stage. He wants you to know that he's going to climb on that stage. He really wants you to know. He wants you to know it. So he's going to do it. It's a big step. Almost childlike, learning to walk. The movement is so important. Like he's moving, he loves the way the lips feel on the fabric. That's just because it feels good. after Skinner wanted to take, they thought that this wasn't a happier one. This guy was in a better mood or something than the guy at the table. Getting into some kind of mood. He has to do all this stuff. We don't have time. He's making his little nest. He has to run around. He's getting his thing together. Oh boy, what's he doing? He's gonna sit down in a little while. Take him a while to reset. Oh, what am I gonna? Okay, sit down on that. Look, how many pillows can you have? Oh, look at that. Slow it down. This is good. Everything's exaggerated. Everything means something. Everything's really important. So he's really making it rare. Sitting is not just sitting. Sitting is like really. So I'm reading the coffee. Oh, God. It goes on and on and on and on. It's just unbelievable. Oh, dear. And I did a performance just recently in Torino, and I read a transcription of a performance aloud to the audience. And then I saw the same performance like I am doing now. And you saw how I respond to the image and how I responded to the words and how they changed me and how it affects me. And it really does. It comes right into my, just right there. And this kind of empathy, this kind of getting into that is not unlike the getting into the stick figure. In a way, he is like Glenn, but I don't want to call him Glenn. He's beyond Glenn. He's something else. And this is the last formal hypnosis performance I did, and this was two and a half years ago. I haven't done it since. I did it privately, and I'm going to be doing something tomorrow, but nothing public. This was it. It's too difficult, and I've done a lot of it. See, now when he puts the thing over his shoulder, he becomes like an old man. He's no longer. He's like an older guy. Let's slow down and see what he's saying.
Start your day! 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 What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? You fuck shit! What are you gonna do? You fuck shit! You fuck shit! You don't know what you're gonna do, do you? You don't know. You don't know. You don't know. You think you know, but you really don't know what you're gonna do. You really don't know. You're lost. You're looking at a cup of coffee and you're lost. Start the day! Start the day! Start the day! Start the day! I can't wait to start my day. Woo-wee! This is great! I love this! This is so good! Oh boy! Oh boy, this is great! Oh boy! I'm starting it! Wow! Wow! That's good! That's good! That's good! That's good! This is great! I love this! This is really good! Oh boy! Can you tell how good this is? Can you tell? Can you tell? This is really good! The day has started. Oh, the day has started. The day has started. The day has started. The day has started.
Let's go to 3. I'm sorry. You can at least see how things progress in a fast way, because otherwise we don't have enough time. We have to quit. Oh, he's reading the paper. He pulled up his pants. That's funny, because the pulling up the pants is usually a sign of the child, but then you have the sign of the old man with the thing over the head. So it's like this combination of the two. Then he does this painting. Now this was actually shown, which I had forgotten, but I showed this this picture at Karsten Schubert's in a show about, I don't know, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. It must have been just a year ago. Numbers are very important. Again and again and again, he writes at numbers. And in the fact, in the print, it says, "I love coffee." That is a brand that he invented. He thought that would be really, I love coffee is a brand of coffee. And that's why the title is, I love coffee. And so there's a secondary element. And who knows what that thing means? I have no idea. This is, this kind of signage with the ladder has been from the 70s. I always represent that. And just because I've always represented it, there's no more reason than that. And then I made a rubbing. I made 2 rubbings of this picture and shown it in the gallery at the same time. Now this is how he writes. Pretty clean. This is, I think it's shit and fuck and whatever, all the bad words he could think of. And then this whole thing becomes like a brain, I'm pretty sure. Although it's, we never know. Let's slow down. Let's see what he says, if he says anything. he's almost done. Matt again. I forgot what he's gonna do next. And I'm aware, I mean, the brain is funny that way in that you are aware and unaware. The whole process is not black or white. There are levels, and it's always moving, and it's always, now he's going to bed. The day's over, he's finished. He's had his day, he woke up, had his coffee, made his art, did his work, and now he's gone to bed. And then I think he does something which is at the very end. This is the very end. And let's hear what he's saying. There we go. 2. Let's go to 2. And he does this. This is the last one I did. This is the last time. I don't know when the next time will be. And then I think he leaves after cursing. Oh, see, yeah, that's the end. Okay. That's finished. We're done. Thank you.